Hey guys, tonight we are going to gently, very gently deposit you into the often romanticized but remarkably uncomfortable world of feudal Japan. Imagine, if you will, the scent of cherry blossoms, quickly overpowered by the less fragrant aroma of medieval life. The serene temples stand in stark contrast to the constant grinding reality for most people. It's a beautiful tapestry, certainly, but woven with threads of hardship that would make your average Monday morning feel like a spa day. And honestly, with your modern sensibilities and a distinct lack of samurai training, you probably wouldn't last a day. Or, to be generous, maybe until lunchtime, if you're lucky enough to find some. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. We're all about genuine connection on this channel, much like the genuine shock you'd experience upon discovering the local hygiene standards. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little community of night owls stretch across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hums, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't so much arrive as appear. One moment you're drifting off, perhaps with the soft glow of a screen still dancing behind your eyelids, and the next there's a definite chill in the air. A dampness. The ground beneath you isn't your familiar mattress. It's hard, uneven, and smells faintly of wet earth and something acrid like old wood smoke. Your eyes crack open, and the first thing you register is wood. Lots of wood. Wooden beams, dark and smoke-stained, form a low ceiling just above you. You're lying on a coarse mat, thin enough that you can feel the rough planks beneath it. Panic, that cold, unwelcome jolt, tries to take hold, but we're easing into this, remember. Just breathe. Let's observe. You sit up wincing as your modern coddled back protests. The room, if you can call it that, is small and shadowy. Paper shoji screens, looking far more fragile than they do in those calming Zen garden videos, serve as walls letting in a dim gray light. Through a slight tear in one, you catch a glimpse of, well, more wood and thatched roofs. No concrete, no power lines, no distant hum of traffic. Your trusty smartphone, by the way, is now an exquisitely useless rectangle of glass and metal. No service doesn't even begin to cover it. It's basically a very confusing, very expensive paperweight at this point. Slowly, cautiously, you slide open one of the screens. The air that greets you is a cocktail of scents. Damp earth, wood smoke certainly, but also something sharp and organic that might be primitive sanitation mixed with the not unpleasant aroma of cooking rice and fish. Your ears pick up unfamiliar sounds, the clatter of wooden sandals on packed earth. A dog barking in a way that sounds subtly different. Snippets of a language that flows with an alien cadence like water over smooth stones, yet utterly incomprehensible. You try to make sense of it, but it's like trying to catch smoke with a sieve. A figure shuffles past the opening. A woman, her face weathered, her back bent. She wears layers of drab-patched clothing, and her eyes, when they momentarily flick towards you, widen almost imperceptibly before she hurries on, head bowed. It's your first hint that you and your comfortable pajamas or whatever anachronistic attire you've materialized in are wildly out of place. Think of it like showing up to a black tie gala in a swimsuit. Awkward, but with potentially more dire consequences here. You venture out, your bare feet meeting cold, damp earth. The narrow laneway is muddy, hemmed in by more wooden houses with those elegant sloping roofs. People are stirring. A child snot-nosed and barefoot stops dead in his tracks, points a grimy finger at you, and lets out a squeak before darting away. An older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, pauses from sweeping his doorway with a twig broom. He doesn't smile. His gaze is long, assessing, and deeply suspicious. You offer a hesitant wave, a universally friendly gesture, right? Apparently not. He just continues to stare, unblinking. It's the kind of stare that makes you want to check if you've accidentally offended his ancestors, his gods, and his favorite cat, all in one go. This is where the rigidity starts to press in on you. You quickly realize that your very presence is a disruption, an anomaly. These people live by codes you can't even guess at. The way they move, the way they avoid eye contact or make it with pointed intensity, the subtle shifts in posture. It all speaks a language of status and propriety that you're utterly deaf to. You'll soon learn that society here has meticulously ordered a strict hierarchy, known historically as the Shinokosho system. At the top were the samurai, the shi, the warrior administrators. Below them, the peasants or farmers know who produced the food and were the backbone of the economy. Then came the artisans ko with their crafts, and finally the merchants sho, who despite often accumulating wealth were officially at the bottom of this Confucian-influenced pecking order, as they were seen as profiting from the work of others. And beneath even them were outcasts the eti and hainen, dealing with tasks considered impure. Every interaction, every glance is filtered through this unspoken understanding of who stands where. You might even make an early, unwitting cultural blunder related to something as simple as sleeping. Had you been offered a place to rest and innocently arranged your pillow to the north, you'd have committed a faux pas. Kitamakura, sleeping with your head to the north, is traditionally how the deceased are laid out for funerals, so it's considered terribly unlucky. No one would tell you directly, probably. They'd just whisper and avoid you, or perhaps something unfortunate would happen nearby and you'd be the suspected cause. Historians still argue whether these social divisions were always as rigidly enforced in everyday village life as the official edicts proclaimed, or if local conditions allowed for a little more, shall we say, wiggle room between the classes, particularly in more remote areas. But for you, an outsider, every line is a potential tripwire. Trying to ask for directions might get you an inscrutable stare, or worse, attract the attention of someone who wants to know why you're there and who gave you permission. There are no tourist information booths here, no friendly locals eager to practice their English. There is only the weight of centuries of tradition and an all-encompassing social order that has no place for you. This isn't just culture shock, it's cultural submersion in icy water. The feeling of helplessness, of utter incompetence in even the simplest social exchange begins to dawn on you. This is indeed a dawn, but one filled with discomfort and a creeping dread. That intense, unwavering stare from the old man is, you quickly surmise, not an invitation to chat about the local weather patterns. You feel a prickle on your neck, the distinct sensation of being scrutinized by multiple pairs of eyes. Your peculiar, out-of-time clothes and your very stillness mark you as profoundly other. Survival, even in these first few bewildered moments, whispers a simple, urgent instruction blend. Or at least try not to look like an utterly useless, potentially dangerous apparition. You see movement, a rhythm of bodies in the distance bent low in fields that shimmer under the watery sunlight. It's a miserable, muddy expanse, but it's where everyone seems to be. So you start walking, or rather squelching. The ground beneath your feet changes from the packed earth of the village path to the clinging, sucking mud of a recently flooded paddy field. It's cold, surprisingly so, and it grabs at your ankles with an astonishingly firm grip. Each step is a minor battle. You see figures, men and women, up to their knees in the murky water, engaged in repetitive, back-breaking labor. Their movements are economical, born of long, weary practice. No one looks up as you approach the edge of the field, but you feel their awareness of you. This isn't a casual gardening session at a community allotment. This is the engine room of their entire existence. Someone, a man whose face is hidden by a wide conical straw hat, grunts and gestures with a mud-caked hand towards an empty space in the line. It's not a friendly invitation. It's an order as clear as if it were shouted through a megaphone. And honestly, what's your alternative? Arguing the toss about labor laws, demanding to see your ambassador. You slide into the water, which immediately soaks through whatever flimsy modern excuse for trousers you happen to be wearing, chilling you to the bone. The cold is a shock, a persistent, unwelcome companion. You're handed a bundle of bright green rice seedlings. The task, as you quickly glean from watching your new unwilling colleagues, is to painstakingly plant these one by one into the mud, maintaining a reasonably straight line and consistent spacing. It sounds simple. It is perhaps the single most excruciatingly laborious task you have ever undertaken. Within minutes, your back begins to scream a protest so loud, it's a wonder the local kami spirits don't complain about the noise. Your knees ache from the constant stooping. Your fingers, unused to such rough treatment, are quickly scraped raw by the gritty mud, and the surprisingly sharp edges of the rice shoots. Remember that faint scent of wood smoke you noticed earlier? You'd trade a kingdom for it now over the pervasive, earthy yet sour smell of the paddy water, and the organic fertilizer which you suspect with a dawning, sickening certainty involves a lot of night soil. Oh yes, a prized commodity, because nothing says organic farming quite like human manure. The sun, weak as it is, climbs higher. There are no breaks, no water cooler chats, no little plastic cups of questionable liquid to keep you going. Just the rhythmic thwack of seedlings being pushed into the unyielding muck, the squelch of feet, and the occasional barked instruction from an overseer figure who seems to possess an inexhaustible supply of energy and a deep-seated resentment for anyone moving slower than a startled weasel. A particularly unpleasant fitness instructor. Only the penalty for slacking off here isn't burpees. It's something you instinctively feel you'd rather not discover. Your muscles burn, your shoulders throb, and a headache begins to pound, behind your eyes fueled by dehydration and the sheer relentless monotony. You start to understand why Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on mindfulness and repetitive tasks, might have found fertile ground here. You either find a meditative state, or you go utterly mad. This is the reality of rice cultivation, the cornerstone of feudal Japan's economy. This grain is everything food currency and the measure of a lord's wealth. The koku, a unit of rice equivalent to about 180 liters, supposedly enough to feed one person for a year, was the standard. A daimyo feudal lord's power and status were directly measured by the kokudaka, the total rice yield of his domain. And that yield was paid for with the sweat, and often the tears of people just like your temporary companions. They weren't just growing dinner, they were growing the wealth and power of the samurai class who ruled over them. And a significant portion of their hard-won harvest would be taken as tax. Failure of the crop meant not just hunger for the peasants, but also instability for the entire domain. As the hours crawl by with the speed of a geriatric snail climbing a very tall, very sticky mountain, you become acutely aware of every tiny protest your body makes. A blister forming on your palm, the sting of sweat in your eyes, the agonizing crick in your neck. You see an old woman beside you, her movements slow but steady, her face a mask of stoic endurance. How many years has she done this? Decades, certainly. Her hands are gnarled, almost root-like testaments to a life of toil. It's a humbling and frankly terrifying perspective. Your half-day of discomfort is her entire existence. A rather delightful if slimy little quirk of this agricultural life you discover is the presence of dojo loaches, small eel-like fish that thrive in the muddy paddy waters. While mostly seen as just part of the scenery, these were sometimes caught and eaten, providing a tiny occasional protein supplement to the otherwise monotonous diet. Catching one by hand while trying to plant rice without face planting into the muck would be an Olympic sport in itself, you reckon. You see a child expertly snatch one up and grin. Perhaps there's a knack to it you haven't acquired in your very brief tenure. The efficiency of these ancient farming methods, considering the tools available, mostly wooden plows, hoes, and sickles, is remarkable. But historians still debate the exact average yields per unit of land and how much these varied due to factors like weather, soil quality, and the availability of effective irrigation techniques, which were incredibly sophisticated in some areas. Local village leaders often manage these intricate water rights and communal labor projects, possessing a surprising degree of autonomy, though always under the watchful eye of their samurai overlords. It was a system honed over centuries, designed for one primary purpose: to extract the maximum possible rice from the earth. Your back, however, isn't concerned with historical debates. It's lodging a very personal, very compelling argument for an immediate ceasefire. But the sun continues its slow arc, and the rows of seedlings stretch on seemingly forever. Finally, as the watery sun begins to dip towards the horizon, painting the undersides of the clouds in hues of bruised purple and tired orange, a signal is given. The overseer, who you've mentally nicknamed Grumbles, barks something, and the bent figures around you slowly, agonizingly begin to straighten up. Your own back feels like a rusted hinge, each movement accompanied by a groan that seems to emanate from your very soul. You emerge from the paddy, caked in mud from your shins, down your hands raw, and every muscle singing a painful lament. If you thought you were tired after a long day at your modern job, scrolling through emails and attending meetings, this is a new universe of exhaustion. You've never known hunger quite like this, either a gnawing emptiness that makes your stomach feel like it's trying to digest itself. You follow the others, a straggling, mud-caked procession, back towards the humble dwellings that constitute the village. The air, thankfully, is less pungent here, but the smell of cooking fires, wood smoke, and something vaguely savory now torments your senses. Your dreams of a multi-course meal, perhaps a juicy burger, or decadent pasta, evaporate like mist. You see the reality of your upcoming repast, a small, rough-spun bowl thrust into your hands, containing rice. Steamed white rice. And next to it, another small bowl with some pickled vegetables, mostly radish by the looks and smell of it. There might be a thin, watery miso soup. And that, my friend, is dinner. Every single night. Welcome to the feudal Japanese peasant diet rice radish repeat. If you were lucky, really lucky, maybe once in a blue moon, you'd get a tiny piece of salted fish or some foraged greens. But for the most part, it was a monotonous, barely sufficient carbohydrate-heavy existence. Protein was a luxury. Fresh fruit, a dream. Your modern palate, accustomed to a riot of flavors and global cuisine available at the click of an app, would find this utterly soul-crushingly depressing. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner being a slightly larger portion of rice. Christmas. Maybe some extra pickles. It's no wonder a little bit of chili pepper, introduced by the Portuguese in the 16th century, became incredibly popular. Anything for a bit of zing to cut through the blandness. You sit on the packed earth floor of a dim hut, sharing the space with several other equally exhausted individuals. They eat quickly with a focused intensity that speaks of true hunger. There's no idle chit-chat, no lingering over the meal. It's fuel pure and simple. You try to emulate them, but the rough grains of rice unadorned are a challenge to your pampered throat. The pickles are salty and sharp, a welcome counterpoint, but there are so few of them. You quickly realize that every mouthful is precious. Wasting food here wouldn't just be rude. It would be a profound insult to the back-breaking labor that produced it. This constant dietary monotony wasn't just boring, it was dangerous. Nutritional deficiencies were rife. Beriberi, caused by a lack of thiamine vitamin B1 due to a diet overly reliant on polished white rice, was common particularly in cities where white rice was a status symbol. The irony, of course, is that the nutrient-rich rice bran was often fed to animals. Country folk who often ate less polished brown rice or other grains like millet and barley, mixed in, sometimes fared a little better in this specific regard, though their overall calorie intake might have been even lower. You look around at the faces in the dim light, the sallow skin, the thinness of the limbs, and see the subtle, insidious signs of chronic undernourishment. Famine was the wolf forever at the door, a recurring nightmare that shaped life and death. A bad harvest due to drought floods, pests like the dreaded Unca plant hopper, or even an untimely volcanic eruption which could dim the sun for a growing season, meant starvation for potentially millions. Historical records are replete with accounts of devastating famines, like the Great Tenmei famine in the 1780s, which killed an estimated 900,000 people. During such times, desperate people resorted to eating anything bark roots, clay, and sometimes tragically each other. Historians still argue whether some of the more lurid tales of cannibalism were exaggerated, or if they represented the grim reality of total societal breakdown in the worst-hit areas. But the sheer terror of starvation was a powerful unifying force, driving innovation in agriculture, but also shaping a worldview where an abundance of food was almost unimaginable for the common person. You finish your meager portion, the gnawing hunger only slightly abated. You feel a pang of guilt remembering all the times you casually tossed out leftovers or complained about being too full. Such waste would be unthinkable here. Every grain was accounted for, every scrap hoarded. Sometimes as a quirky, if desperate supplement to the diet, things like indigo locusts or hachinoko bee larvae were consumed, especially in inland regions where fish was scarce. Boiled in soy sauce and sugar if available, they provided a crunchy, protein-rich, if somewhat psychologically challenging snack. You eye a large beetle scuttling across the floor and briefly wonder, then firmly push the thought away. Not yet. Hopefully never. As darkness fully envelops the village, there's no artificial light save for the dying embers of cooking fires and perhaps a single oil lamp in the headman's house. The world shrinks to the confines of this tiny hut. Sleep comes not as a gentle transition, but as a collapse, a complete surrender to the bone-deep weariness that has claimed every fiber of your being. Your dreams are not of escape, but of endless muddy fields and the sharp tang of pickles, a relentless loop reflecting the grinding reality you've been thrust into. And even in sleep, your stomach rumbles, a constant, uncomfortable reminder of its chronic emptiness, a baseline state of being for so many who lived and died in this era. Tomorrow it begins again. Rice, radish, repeat. And the faint ever-present whisper of potential starvation if the heavens or the local daimyo's policies prove unkind. You awaken with a groan, every joint and muscle a symphony of complaint. The thin matting does little to cushion you from the hard earth floor, and the memory of yesterday's toil in the paddy fields is less a memory and more a physical presence residing in the ache of your lower back and the stiffness in your neck. It's barely dawn, but the village is already stirring. There are no snooze buttons here, no leisurely awakenings with a warm cup of coffee. The first order of business after a quick splash of cold water on your face from a communal wooden bucket is inevitably more work. But today something feels off. A young child is wailing a persistent, fretful cry that cuts through the usual morning sounds. An older woman is crooning softly, trying to comfort him, but the sound is laced with an undeniable anxiety. You see the child. He's flushed his small body, radiating an unnatural heat even from a distance. His breathing is shallow and rapid. Even with your 21st century non-medical layman's knowledge, the signs are troubling. Fever. And in this world without access to antibiotics, antivirals, or even basic fever reducers like paracetamol, a high fever is a terrifying harbinger. Illness is not a mere inconvenience here. It's a potential death sentence. The concept of germ theory is centuries away. Sickness is often attributed to malevolent spirits, curses, imbalances in the body's vital energies, or the disfavor of gods and ancestors. You watch as the child's mother dabs his forehead with a damp cloth, her face etched with worry. Someone else mutters about a possible bad omen, perhaps a fox spirit kitsune playing a malicious trick. Your modern mind screams infection bacteria virus, but those concepts are meaningless here. The local healer, if there is one, might be an elderly woman with knowledge of medicinal herbs, or perhaps a charismatic individual claiming connection to the spiritual world. Their treatments will be a blend of folk wisdom passed down through generations and outright superstition. You might see them apply a poultice of dubious ingredients, perhaps something involving powdered toad skins, or burnt snake bones mixed with a prayer or a chant. Historians still argue about the efficacy of many traditional Kampo medicines. Some herbal remedies certainly had genuine, if mild, pharmacological effects, while others were pure placebo or, worse, actively harmful. If the child's condition worsens, the remedies might become more desperate. Moxibustion. The burning of dried mugwort on specific acupuncture points was a common treatment for a wide range of ailments. It's meant to stimulate the flow of vital energy, but you can only imagine the discomfort for an already sick child. Then there were prayers offered at the local shrine, or perhaps a Buddhist monk would be called to perform a ritual. You remember from your own world the importance of hygiene, clean water, and sanitation in preventing the spread of disease. Here, these are luxuries beyond imagining for most. Water is drawn from communal wells or streams often contaminated. Waste disposal is rudimentary at best. Lice, fleas, and intestinal parasites are constant companions, so ubiquitous they're almost not worth mentioning, like the air they breathe. That constant itch you've been feeling. Yeah, probably not just dry skin. The major killers were not dramatic sword fights, but silent, insidious diseases. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid from contaminated water and food. Smallpox and measles sweeping through populations with no immunity, leaving devastation in their wake. Tuberculosis, the White Plague, was a slow-consuming killer. Infant and child mortality rates were appallingly high. A simple cut or scratch which you'd slap a Band-Aid on and forget could become infected and lead to a gruesome, painful death from sepsis. You glance at the raw scrapes on your own hands from yesterday's fieldwork and feel a sudden chilling premonition. Better keep those as clean as possible, though clean is a very relative term here. And then there's the sorcery aspect. If a sickness is persistent or a series of misfortunes befalls a family or the village, blame will inevitably be sought. Perhaps someone is a witch or has offended a powerful local spirit. Accusations of witchcraft on Myodo practitioners who'd gone rogue, or just an unfortunate old woman who lived alone and had a few too many cats, could lead to ostracism or even violence. The lines between medicine, religion, and magic were blurry, often indistinguishable. A healer might also be a diviner or an exorcist. Their role was not just to cure the body, but to restore harmony between the individual, the community, and the spiritual world. You see an older man drawing a complex symbol in the dirt outside his hut with a stick. Perhaps a ward against evil spirits or a prayer for protection. It's a world saturated with belief in the unseen, where every rustle of leaves in the wind could be a message, every unexplained ailment a sign of supernatural interference. One rather peculiar, if somewhat unsavory tidbit from this era's medical beliefs involves the idea of shakuhachi flute playing as a form of Zen meditation and healing. The Kamuso mendicant monks of the Fuke sect of Zen Buddhism were famous for wearing distinctive basket-like hats tengai that completely covered their heads and for playing the shakuhachi for alms and enlightenment. Some believe the very vibrations of the flute played with sufficient spiritual focus could have therapeutic effects. While it sounds a bit out there, perhaps the deep breathing and meditative state offered some genuine stress relief, which in a world this tough couldn't hurt. Certainly more pleasant than a powdered toad poultice. The wailing of the sick child continues a soundtrack to your dawning comprehension of just how vulnerable you are. Your 21st century immune system, coddled by sanitation and vaccines, is probably in for a rude awakening from a host of pathogens it has never encountered. You instinctively want to help to offer some advice about hydration or hygiene, but how your words would be incomprehensible, your knowledge utterly alien. You're a ghost from the future watching a small common tragedy unfold, powerless to intervene. The only medicine you have access to is hope. Hope that the child's fever breaks hope that the healer's herbs have some effect. Hope that whatever unseen forces govern this world will show a little mercy. But in feudal Japan, mercy was often as scarce as a full belly or a disease-free day. The grim reality is that survival often came down to sheer luck and a strong constitution, neither of which you can take for granted. The sick child's cries eventually fade either into sleep or something more final. You try not to dwell on it. Your own minor aches and pains, which seemed so monumental yesterday, now feel trivial in comparison. A different kind of tension pervades the village today, however. There's a hushed, anxious air. People speak in lower tones, their eyes darting nervously towards the makeshift road that leads out of this small cluster of huts. Something is expected. Or perhaps someone. And judging by the expressions, it's not the nice kind of anticipation like waiting for a beloved relative or the ice cream truck. More like waiting for a particularly severe weather warning to hit. Then you see them, 3 figures on horseback, emerging from the morning mist like apparitions from a warrior epic. They are, in a word, intimidating. Even from a distance, their posture is ramrod straight, their movements economical and precise. These are samurai, the ruling class, the enforcers of order, the arbiters of life and death. Your modern understanding of law enforcement is about to get a very medieval, very sharp-edged recalibration. As they ride closer, you take in the details. The lacquered armor intricately laced with silk cords. Not the full heavy battlefield armor, but a lighter, more functional set for travel and everyday duty. The 2 swords, a long katana and a shorter wakizashi, thrust through their belts. This pair is called a daisho, a symbol of their status. Their faces are impassive, stern, and carry an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. The villagers, those who are out and about, practically melt into the doorways of their huts or bow so low their foreheads almost touch their knees. The silence is profound, broken only by the clink of harness and the horse's breath. You caught out in the open feel a sudden urgent need to become very, very small. You mimic the villagers bowing low, trying to project an image of utter subservience and harmlessness. Probably best not to make direct eye contact, you figure. Good call. One of the samurai, clearly the leader, dismounts with a lithe movement that belies the bulk of his armor. He hands the reins to one of his retainers and strides towards the village headman, who has emerged trembling slightly from the largest hut. Their conversation is brief, low-toned, and entirely one-sided. The headman nods, bows repeatedly, and seems to shrink with every passing moment. You can't understand the words, but the power dynamic is brutally clear. The samurai represents the daimyo, the feudal lord who owns this land, and by extension, everyone and everything on it. He is here to collect taxes, rice, of course, enforce edicts, or perhaps investigate some local dispute or reported crime. The laws these samurai enforce are not the complex codified legal systems you're used to. While there were various legal codes throughout Japanese history, like the Jōei Code or Gosabai Shikimoku from the Kamakura period, which established principles for land rights and duties of vassals' justice at the local level, especially for peasants, was often swift, harsh, and arbitrary. The word of a samurai was quite literally law. They possessed a right known as kiri sute gomen, permission to cut down and leave. Yadasaidari. This infamous privilege allowed samurai to strike down commoners who offended them or behaved disrespectfully, supposedly with impunity. While it wasn't meant to be used whimsically, there were in theory supposed to be witnesses, and a report made. The chilling reality was that a peasant's life could be forfeit for a perceived slight, a moment of disrespect, or simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time when a samurai was in a bad mood. Talk about a tough crowd. You remember your earlier awkward wave and suddenly feel a cold sweat. That could have gone very, very badly. The samurai leader gestures towards the rice storage shed. The headman scurries to unlock it. Sacks of rice, the product of countless hours of back-breaking labor like you endured yesterday, are brought out and inspected. The samurai are meticulous, ensuring the quality and quantity meet their lord's exacting standards. There's no negotiation, no pleading for leniency. The tax is due and it will be paid. Failure to meet the quota could result in severe punishment for the entire village beatings, confiscation of what little property they owned, or even execution of the headman as an example. It's a system built on fear, a constant reminder of who holds the power. Historians still argue about how frequently kiri sute gomen was actually invoked, and whether the threat of it was more powerful than its actual application in maintaining social order. Some suggest it was a rarely used power reserved for extreme cases of insult, while others believe it fostered a climate of terror that kept the lower classes firmly in their place. Regardless of its frequency, the knowledge that a samurai could do this legally was a potent tool of social control. You're pretty sure you wouldn't want to be the one to test the statistical probability of it. As a quirky detail of this power dynamic, sometimes samurai lords would issue seemingly bizarre edicts just to test the obedience of their populace. For example, a lord might decree that for a certain week, everyone in a village must wear their clothes inside out or walk backwards. Failure to comply with these seemingly nonsensical rules would still result in punishment. It was less about the act itself and more about reinforcing the habit of unquestioning obedience, because I said so was the ultimate legal justification. Your desire to ask, but why, would need to be suppressed with an iron will. The inspection is over. The required rice is loaded onto pack horses brought by the retainers. The lead samurai gives a final curt nod to the headman, mounts his horse, and without a backward glance the three figures ride away, disappearing back into the mists as silently as they arrived. The collective sigh of relief from the villagers is almost audible. The immediate danger has passed, but the oppressive weight of the system they live under remains. It's a system where your life, your labor, your very existence is subject to the whims and decrees of a warrior class, whose primary tools of governance are the sword, and an unshakable belief in their own superiority. You realize that keeping your head down, being as inconspicuous as possible, and developing a very convincing bow are not just matters of politeness here. They are essential survival skills. One wrong move, one defiant glance, one moment of forgetting your non-existent place, and you could find out firsthand just how sharp a katana truly is. And there'd be no trial, no appeal, no sympathetic ear. Just the cold, hard reality of feudal law. The immediate tension following the samurai's departure dissipates, but a lingering unease remains like the metallic taste in the air after a thunderstorm. Your brief, terrifying glimpse into the power of the samurai class has left a profound impression. You've seen them as administrators, as tax collectors, but their very essence, their entire raison d'etre is warfare. And the path of the warrior, the way of the samurai, is steeped in a complex code and a brutal reality that would make most modern video game skirmishes look like a pillow fight. You won't be joining their ranks, obviously. Entry into the samurai class was almost exclusively by birth. You couldn't just sign up at a recruitment office and get your own daisho. But from your lowly vantage point, you might witness aspects of their lives and the harshness of their world. Perhaps a local skirmish breaks out between retainers of your daimyo and those of a neighboring lord over a disputed patch of forest or a water right. Or maybe a ronin, a masterless samurai, essentially a warrior for hire or sometimes a bandit, passes through the village, his presence radiating a dangerous, unpredictable energy. Imagine seeing two samurai preparing for a duel. It's not the swashbuckling theatrical swordplay of movies. It's deadly serious, a matter of honor and often life. They'd perform elaborate pre-ritual purifications, their faces grim. The swords themselves, particularly the katana, were considered the soul of the samurai, objects of immense spiritual and artistic significance, forged with incredible skill by master swordsmiths, using a complex process of folding and layering steel to create a blade that was incredibly sharp and resilient. The blades were often tested, a practice known as tameshigiri, sometimes on condemned criminals or more gruesomely on cadavers to ensure their cutting ability. A common saying was that a good sword should be able to cut through 3 bodies, stacked one on top of the other with a single stroke. You try not to picture that test in detail. Their training was relentless from a young age, encompassing not just swordsmanship kenjutsu, but also archery kyujutsu, horsemanship, bujutsu, spearmanship sojutsu, and unarmed combat jujutsu. It was a life dedicated to martial perfection. But beyond the physical skills, they were bound by Bushido, the way of the warrior, an unwritten code of conduct, emphasizing loyalty, courage, self-discipline, honor, and a stoic acceptance of death. This code, however, wasn't fully codified until much later during the more peaceful Edo period, and its interpretation and practice varied considerably over time and between different clans. Historians still argue whether the idealized Bushido, often portrayed in later periods, accurately reflected the often pragmatic and brutal realities of warfare in earlier feudal Japan, where treachery and strategic advantage frequently trumped notions of chivalry. If you were to witness a battle, it would be a terrifying spectacle. Not neat lines of soldiers, but chaotic melees. The shouts of warriors, the screams of the wounded, the thud of arrows, the clash of steel on steel. Armor, while offering protection, was also heavy and cumbersome. Samurai often sought out individual opponents of similar rank for one-on-one combat, sometimes announcing their lineage and deeds before engaging. A sort of pre-fight trash-talking, but with much higher stakes. Archery played a huge role with mounted archers, Yabusame demonstrating incredible skill, able to fire accurately from a galloping horse. Forget any notions of fair play. Deception, ambush, and exploiting any weakness were all part of the tactical arsenal. The consequences of defeat were dire. Capture often meant execution, sometimes in rather unpleasant ways. And for the samurai, disgrace was considered worse than death. This led to the practice of seppuku or harakiri ritual suicide by disembowelment, a way to avoid capture, atone for failure, or protest an injustice. It was an agonizingly painful death, usually performed with a trusted second, kaishakunin present, to deliver a quick decapitation once the initial cut had been made. The composure and courage shown during seppuku were considered the ultimate testament to a samurai's adherence to Bushido. It's a chilling concept, the idea of valuing honor so far above life itself that such an act was not only accepted, but in certain circumstances expected. Imagine your boss suggesting that instead of just getting fired for a major mistake, you should, opt for a more permanent and dramatic exit strategy. Even in times of relative peace, the samurai class maintained its martial readiness. They might participate in hunts, which were also forms of military training, or engage in martial arts competitions. A rather unusual and frankly dangerous sport that was popular among some samurai, particularly during the Kamakura period, was inumono, or dog shooting. This involved mounted archers shooting at dogs. Yes, actual dogs, specially bred for the purpose in an enclosed arena. It was seen as a way to hone archery skills and maintain a warrior spirit. Animal rights activists, you can imagine, would have had a field day. Thankfully, it was later banned by some shoguns as excessively cruel. The path of the warrior was not one of glory alone. It was fraught with peril, demanded immense sacrifice, and was underpinned by a constant readiness to kill and be killed. Their lives were a paradox, practitioners of brutal violence, who also, particularly in later periods, cultivated refined arts like poetry, tea ceremony, and calligraphy. They were the guardians of a strict social order, yet their internecine conflicts often plunged the country into chaos. Your peasant existence is hard, certainly, but it's free from the crushing weight of honor that defined every moment of a samurai's life, free from the obligation to face death with a calm, painted smile. The sight of a polished sword, the glint of lacquered armor, now carries a far deeper, more chilling meaning for you. It's not just a costume. It's a symbol of a worldview where life is transient and duty to one's lord and one's honor is absolute. Life in your little peasant village is a claustrophobic cycle of mud rice and fear of authority. You start to wonder, as anyone would, if this is it. Is all of feudal Japan just an endless expanse of paddy fields and stern-faced samurai? Perhaps you think there's more. Maybe a city Kyoto, the imperial capital, or perhaps one of the burgeoning castle towns that dot the landscape. Surely life there must be different, more vibrant, more survivable. You wouldn't be entirely wrong, but easier is definitely not the word you'd find. Let's imagine through some improbable stroke of luck, or perhaps you've stowed away on a merchant's ox cart, hidden under a pile of turnips reeking of desperation, and turnips, you find yourself approaching a major urban center. The first thing you'd notice, even from a distance, is the sheer density. Kyoto, for example, even in earlier feudal periods, was one of the largest cities in the world, a sprawling metropolis of wooden buildings packed tightly together. Forget zoning laws or green belts. It's a sea of roofs, temples, and the occasional grander estate of a nobleman or powerful monastery. The sounds are different too. A cacophony of voices, the rumble of cartwheels on unpaved streets, the cries of vendors, the chanting of monks, the clang of hammers from artisan workshops. It's a sensory overload compared to the muted sounds of your rural hamlet. As you enter the city proper, the chaos part of Kyoto's chaos becomes immediately apparent. The streets are narrow, unpaved, and often filthy. Sanitation, while perhaps slightly more organized than in a tiny village with designated pits or collection services in some areas, is still a major issue. The stench can be overwhelming, a ripe melange of humanity. Animals cooking fires, industrial effluvia, and decomposing waste. You'd need a strong stomach and perhaps a scented cloth to hold over your nose like some foppish aristocrat from a European period drama, though that would probably get you some very strange looks. Crowds throng the thoroughfares. You see merchants hawking their wares from tiny stalls selling everything from pottery and textiles to swords and religious talismans. There are street performers, jugglers, acrobats, storytellers drawing rapt audiences, pilgrims from distant provinces identifiable by their distinctive garb and devotional fervor, make their way to famous temples and shrines. Buddhist monks and Shinto priests are everywhere their robes, adding splashes of color to the otherwise drab attire of the common folk. And of course, samurai are a common sight striding through the crowds with an air of unshakable self-importance, commoners scattering before them like leaves in a windstorm. It's vibrant, yes. It's also teeming noisy and frankly a bit ripe. Here you're no longer an anonymous peasant tilling the soil. You are now an anonymous face in a bewildering crowd. This anonymity can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, you're less likely to be singled out by the village headman or the local samurai tax collector. On the other, you are utterly alone with no community to fall back on if you get into trouble or fall sick. Finding food and shelter becomes your immediate pressing concern. Unless you have a skill, perhaps you're a passable carpenter, or you can weave, or highly unlikely you can read and write well enough to be a scribe, finding work is incredibly difficult. You might end up as a day laborer hauling goods at the docks or construction sites, earning just enough for a bowl of noodles and a space on a vermin-infested floor in a crowded flophouse. The country's calm, which you might now look back on with a strange sort of nostalgia, was indeed deceptive. Rural life had its own dangers, famine, banditry, the whims of the local lord, but it also had a predictable rhythm, a community however stifling and a direct connection to the source of sustenance. City life, especially for the unestablished newcomer, is a constant scramble. Pickpockets, con artists, and bullies are rife. Fires are a terrifyingly frequent occurrence capable of sweeping through the densely packed wooden structures with horrifying speed, leaving thousands homeless in a matter of hours. The Great Fire of Mireki in Edo, later Tokyo in 1657, for example, destroyed a huge portion of the city and killed an estimated 100,000 people. Think of that next time you're annoyed by a fire drill. Yet cities were also centers of culture, commerce, and innovation. It was here that new art forms flourished, where theater-like early forms of no and kabuki developed, and where intellectual currents often originating in Buddhist monasteries spread. For merchants, artisans, and entertainers, cities offered opportunities unavailable in the countryside. The chonin townspeople class, though officially below peasants in the Shinokusho hierarchy, often enjoyed greater wealth and a more sophisticated lifestyle. You might see a wealthy merchant, his robes made of fine silk, though legally he wasn't supposed to outdo the samurai in opulence on his way to a poetry gathering or a tea ceremony. Historians still debate the extent to which this urban commoner culture was truly independent, or if it always operated under the shadow and influence of the dominant samurai values and aesthetics. A quirky feature of urban life, especially in a city like Kyoto with its numerous temples, was the phenomenon of seitaisho. These were places often within temple grounds where free food, usually rice gruel, was distributed to the poor and destitute. It was a form of Buddhist charity, but also a pragmatic way to deal with the ever-present problem of urban poverty and potential social unrest. You might find yourself queuing for such a handout, a humbling experience that underscores your precarious position. It's better than starving, but it's a stark contrast to the bustling commerce and cultural vibrancy happening just streets away. So, is city life better? It's different. It offers more possibilities, perhaps, but also more dangers, more anonymity, and a more intense struggle for daily survival if you're at the bottom of the heap. The deceptive tranquility of the countryside, with its grinding labor and oppressive social structure, might start to seem almost manageable in comparison to the bewildering cutthroat environment of the feudal city. Both are different circles of the same inferno, really. The key, as always, is to adapt, to observe, and to try and find some tiny overlooked niche where you might scrape by without attracting the wrong kind of attention, or succumbing to the myriad hazards that lurk around every corner. Whether it's a collapsing building or a disapproving samurai, whether you found yourself in the teeming, odorous streets of Kyoto, or are still navigating the tight-knit, suspicious community of your rural village, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. Your every move, every word, every glance is freighted with potential meaning you cannot comprehend. Mastering the intricate, unspoken rules of etiquette is not just a nicety. It's a matter of urgent, critical survival. One wrong bow, one improperly delivered pleasantry, one failure to show the correct degree of deference, and you could find yourself facing anything from public humiliation to a swift, painful lesson in feudal Japanese social graces, possibly delivered via the flat of a sword if you're lucky, or its edge if you're not. The bow, of course, is central. It's not just a simple nod, it's a complex language in itself. The depth of the bow, the duration, the position of your hands, even the subtle inclination of your gaze. All these convey specific information about your status relative to the person you are addressing, your respect, your humility, or your contrition. There are different bows for greeting, for thanking, for apologizing, for showing deference to a superior, for acknowledging an equal, or for addressing an inferior, though you in your current predicament are unlikely to be addressing many inferiors. A casual, shallow bow to someone of high status would be a grave insult. An overly deep, obsequious bow to someone of lower rank might cause confusion or even suspicion. You, as an outsider, are an etiquette minefield. You'll probably just default to the deepest, most prolonged bow you can manage, for everyone hoping it covers all bases, which will likely just make you look utterly bizarre and possibly like you're suffering from some sort of spinal affliction. Ah, the foreigner with the permanently bent spine. How quaint. Then there's language. Even if you magically understood Japanese, the specific forms of address, the honorifics kago, and the levels of politeness are bewilderingly complex. There are different ways to say you or I, depending on who you're talking to and your relationship with them. Using the wrong pronoun or verb ending could be a serious gaffe. Referring to a samurai lord with the same casual language you might in your own time use for a work colleague. Unthinkable. The very structure of the language reinforces the social hierarchy. Since you don't understand a word, your best bet is silence combined with that aforementioned all-purpose deep bow and an expression of profound, uncomprehending humility. It's a look you'll get very good at. Gift-giving, too, is a delicate art. If by some miracle you needed to present something to someone, perhaps a peace offering for accidentally trampling their prize radishes, the wrapping of the gift is almost as important as the gift itself. The type of paper, the way it's folded, the cord used to tie it, all carries symbolic meaning. Showing up with a gift sloppily wrapped in, say, an old piece of straw matting would be deeply offensive. Similarly, receiving a gift requires a specific performance of hesitation and initial refusal. Oh, you shouldn't have taken to an extreme level before eventually accepting with profuse thanks. Your modern directness, oh, cool, thanks, would be seen as shockingly rude and grasping. Even something as simple as entering a home is fraught with peril. You must remove your footwear, assuming you even have any by now, and haven't just gone native with bare, muddy feet before stepping onto the raised wooden floor or tatami mats. Pointing your feet directly at someone or at the tokonoma, the alcove displaying art or flowers, is a no-no. Seating positions are strictly determined by status, with the guest of honor or highest-ranking person seated furthest from the door in front of the tokonoma. You naturally will be closest to the drafty entrance, probably next to the pickle barrel. When sake is served, a rare treat perhaps if you somehow impress someone, you never pour your own drink. You pour for others, and someone else, hopefully of appropriate rank, will pour for you. Holding the sack cup with one hand, if you're of lower status when a superior is pouring for you, bad form. Use two hands. Please. Historians still debate how strictly these intricate rules of etiquette were observed by the common peasant classes in their day-to-day interactions among themselves, versus how much was reserved for interactions with social superiors or for formal occasions. While the principles undoubtedly filtered down the practicalities of rural life, likely led to a more relaxed code among equals. However, for you, the alien, every interaction is a high-stakes performance. A lovely little quirky rule, especially in more formal samurai settings, involved the handling of swords. When visiting another's house, a samurai would typically remove his longsword. How he placed it beside him indicated his intentions. If the hilt tsuka pointed to his right, it was a sign of trust, as it would be slower to draw. If it pointed to his left or was kept readily at hand, it signaled alertness or suspicion. You probably won't be carrying a sword, but knowing this might save you from misinterpreting a samurai's body language or lack thereof if he's opted for the trusting placement while still eyeing you like you're about to spontaneously combust. Public displays of strong emotion, anger, excessive joy, deep sorrow, are generally frowned upon, especially among the samurai class who valued stoic composure. Your modern tendency to perhaps gesticulate wildly while talking, or to laugh uproariously at a non-existent funny joke would mark you as uncouth and lacking in self-control. A subtle smile, a slight inclination of the head, a softly spoken word. These are the preferred modes of expression. It's like living in a permanent state of having to be on your best behavior for your scariest great aunt. Only the consequences for slipping up are far more severe than just being denied dessert. Everyday objects, too, can be pitfalls. Chopsticks, for instance. Sticking them upright in your rice bowl, that's how rice is offered to the dead at funerals. Passing food from your chopsticks directly to another's. Also a funereal rite associated with passing bones at a cremation. You'd essentially be wishing death upon your dining companions, which, as you can imagine, is not a great way to make friends or influence people or avoid getting a stern lecture or worse. The cumulative effect of all these rules, these potential blunders, is a constant low-level anxiety. You're walking on eggshells trying to be invisible to offend no one, to simply exist without causing a ripple. But you are by your very nature a ripple. A big, awkward, strangely dressed ripple. Mastering this complex dance of deference and propriety is a full-time job, and one for which you have received absolutely no training. So bow low, speak softly, or not at all, and pray you don't accidentally compliment the headman's wife by comparing her to a particularly auspicious type of turnip that you suspect would not end well. Beyond the immediate, terrifyingly complex rules of social etiquette and the ever-present threat of samurai justice, there's another layer of belief and practice that permeates every aspect of life in feudal Japan religion and superstition. It's not a separate compartment of life visited once a week for an hour. It's woven into the very fabric of existence, influencing everything from farming practices and building construction to personal names and political decisions. Trying to navigate this world without a basic understanding of its spiritual landscape is like trying to sail a ship without a compass in a sea full of hidden reefs and capricious gods. The two major religious traditions you'll encounter are Shinto, the indigenous faith of Japan, and Buddhism, which arrived from Korea and China centuries earlier around the 6th century CE. Rather than being mutually exclusive, they often coexist and blend together in a syncretic mix that can be bewildering to an outsider used to more dogmatic religious boundaries. Think of it less as either or and more as yes and. Also, maybe that weird rock over there is a minor deity, so don't kick it. Shinto is a nature-based religion, polytheistic and animistic, populating the world with thousands, even millions of kami. Kami are not necessarily all-powerful gods in the Western sense. They can be spirits of mountains, rivers, trees, rocks, ancestors, or even particularly impressive people. They are forces of nature and life, and the goal of Shinto practice is to live in harmony with them, to maintain purity, and to ensure their benevolence through offerings, prayers, and rituals at shrines. You'll see these shrines everywhere, from grand complexes in cities to tiny, almost hidden structures in remote forests, or by the side of a paddy field, often marked by a distinctive torii gate. Every village will have its local guardian kami whose favor is essential for good harvests and protection from misfortune. Offending a local kami, perhaps by polluting its stream or felling its sacred tree, is a sure way to bring calamity upon yourself and the entire community. Buddhism, with its sophisticated philosophy, monastic traditions, and diverse schools like Zen Pure Land and Nichiren, offers a different, though often complementary path. It speaks of karma, reincarnation, the cycle of suffering samsara, and the possibility of enlightenment or rebirth in a pure land. Buddhist temples with their serene gardens, incense-filled halls, and chanting monks are centers of learning, spiritual practice, and often considerable political and economic power. Funerary rites are predominantly Buddhist, dealing with the afterlife, while Shinto tends to focus more on life in this world. So you might have a Shinto blessing for a new house, but a Buddhist funeral for its occupants. It's a practical division of spiritual labor. Superstition, however, is the everyday currency of belief for many. The world is alive with unseen forces, ghosts, yurei, usually spirits of those who died violently or with unresolved grievances. Demons oni, and a vast bestiary of magical creatures and spirits from folklore known as yokai. These aren't just charming campfire stories. They are considered real active presences. An illness might be blamed on possession by a fox spirit kitsunetsuki. A run of bad luck could be attributed to a curse placed by an angry neighbor. Certain days are auspicious for travel or marriage, while others are unlucky. Directions hold significance. Remember the Kitamakura taboo about sleeping with your head to the north. The Demon Gate Kaimon, the northeast direction, was considered particularly unlucky, and architects would often design buildings with indentations or specific features to ward off evil influences coming from that quarter. You'll see evidence of these beliefs everywhere. Small roadside shrines to Jizo, a bodhisattva who protects travelers and children. Amulets and talismans omamori worn for protection or good fortune purchased at temples and shrines. Fortune tellers and diviners plying their trade in marketplaces consulted for everything from choosing a spouse to starting a business. Before undertaking any significant enterprise like building a bridge or going to warlords, would consult with priests, monks, or diviners to ensure the timing was auspicious and the relevant spirits appeased. The shogun himself, the military dictator ruling Japan, while a supreme political and military authority, was not immune to these beliefs and would perform rituals and support religious institutions to ensure the stability and prosperity of the realm. Geopolitics was often intertwined with spiritual considerations. For instance, the failed Mongol invasions of the 13th century were attributed by many Japanese to a kamikaze or divine wind. Powerful typhoons that wrecked the Mongol fleets, seen as a sign of the kami protecting Japan. This event profoundly reinforced the belief in Japan as a divinely protected land. A rather curious intersection of belief and everyday life is the traditional Japanese calendar, which incorporated a complex system of lucky and unlucky days influenced by Chinese Onmyodo, the way of yin and yang cosmology. One set of unlucky days was called Sanrinko. It was believed that if you started construction on a Sanrinko day, fires would plague the neighborhood, not just your own house, but two others as well. So no one would dare start building. The catch. Sometimes, if everyone in a village really needed to get started on some communal building project, and they landed on a Sanrinko day, they might perform a ritual mock start, the day before hammering in a single symbolic stake to sort of trick the unlucky influence, then go full steam ahead on the actual Sanrinko day. Bureaucracy and belief in perfect harmony. Historians still argue about the degree to which the ruling elite genuinely subscribed to all the popular superstitions, versus how much they strategically utilized religious institutions and beliefs to legitimize their rule and maintain social control. Regardless, the pervasive influence of these beliefs on the common populace was undeniable. For you attempting to navigate this world, it means being constantly vigilant, not just of social rules, but of these invisible spiritual ones as well. Accidentally desecrating a sacred spot, making an ill-omened remark, or even just being present when something unlucky happens could bring suspicion and misfortune down upon you. You are living in a world where the veil between the mundane and the magical is incredibly thin, and a misstep could anger not just a samurai, but a whole pantheon of gods, ghosts, and mischievous yokai. Tread carefully, and maybe keep a low profile around any particularly old trees or unusually expressive rocks. Time in this feudal landscape doesn't march forward with the relentless, measured tick-tock you're accustomed to. It flows more like a river, sometimes sluggish and meandering through seasons of back-breaking labor and monotonous meals, sometimes rushing in a torrent of sudden violence or upheaval. You've endured the paddy fields, tasted the near-starvation diet, felt the chill of arbitrary justice, witnessed the samurai's path, glimpsed the chaos of the city, and tiptoed through the minefields of etiquette and superstition. You are by now undoubtedly weary a collection of aches, anxieties, and probably a few interesting new parasites you'd rather not investigate too closely. Your modern sensibilities have been thoroughly sandblasted, but even in this seemingly static, tradition-bound world, change is an undercurrent. Feudal Japan, despite its reputation for rigid continuity, was not a monolith frozen in time. It was a dynamic system evolving through centuries of war, political maneuvering, economic shifts, and social pressures. Depending on when in the vast expanse of the feudal era you've landed, roughly late 12th to mid-19th century, you could be experiencing very different realities. The early Kamakura period, with its raw martial vigor, was distinct from the Warring States period, Sengoku Jidai, a brutal, chaotic free-for-all where daimyo constantly battled for supremacy. And that, in turn, was vastly different from the relative peace and stability of the Edo period under the Tokugawa shogunate, a time of cultural flourishing, but also strict social control and isolationist policies. You might start to perceive subtle tremors of these larger shifts even in your little corner of Japan. Perhaps there's increased movement of troops as one daimyo seeks to expand his territory. Or maybe new crops like sweet potatoes introduced in the 17th century, and a lifesaver during famines begin to appear in the fields, altering the agricultural landscape and offering a slightly more diverse, if still humble, diet. You might hear hushed whispers of foreign traders, Portuguese, Dutch, or English, arriving in distant ports bringing with them exotic goods, new technologies like firearms which dramatically changed warfare, and a disruptive religion, Christianity. The shogunate's response to these foreign influences varied over time, from initial curiosity and trade to eventual persecution and the adoption of sakoku, the policy of national seclusion that lasted for over 2 centuries. If you're in a later period, say the declining years of the Tokugawa shogunate in the mid-19th century, the tremors of change would be much more pronounced. The arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships in 1853, demanding Japan open its ports to international trade, sent shockwaves through the nation. This event exposed the technological and military gap between Japan and the Western powers and helped to precipitate the collapse of the feudal system and the Meiji Restoration in 1868, which catapulted Japan into the modern era. You might see samurai with growing unease, their traditional role challenged. You might witness peasants increasingly burdened by taxes and inspired by new ideas engaging in more frequent uprisings. Iki. The old order is fraying, and the scent of radical transformation is in the air. One quirky manifestation of societal stress and change, sometimes seen during famines or periods of great upheaval, were Ija, Nikkei, why not, or who cares movements. These were spontaneous outbursts of carnivalesque behavior where people would dance in the streets, cross-dress, drink, and generally flout social conventions, sometimes for days on end. It was a form of collective release, a temporary overturning of the oppressive social order part, ecstatic celebration part, desperate protest. Historians still debate the precise social and political significance of Ii-Janaika. Were they purely cathartic, or did they have deeper revolutionary undertones, challenging the legitimacy of the ruling powers? Seeing your usually stoic and downtrodden peasant neighbors suddenly break into wild, unrestrained street dancing would certainly be a memorable, if somewhat alarming, signal that things are seriously unraveling. As you observe these shifts, big or small, a new, unfamiliar feeling might begin to stir within you, a desire not just to survive the day, but to find a way out. Not just out of this particular village or city, but out of this entire era. This isn't your time, not your world. The constant struggle, the oppressive rules, the ever-present dangers, they wear you down. Your initial bewilderment and fear have perhaps given way to a grudging adaptation, but now a deeper longing for your own familiar, predictable, mostly sanitary world begins to assert itself. How would you even begin to attempt an exit? There are no return tickets, no conveniently placed portals. Do you try to reach a port hoping to stow away on a ship destination unknown? Do you search for some mythical, wise old monk who might understand your plight? Though he'd likely just offer you more tea and a cryptic koan about the illusion of self. The fleeting nature of this feudal existence, not just for you, but for everyone within it, becomes more apparent. Life is short, often brutal. Power is ephemeral. Daimyo rise and fall, alliances shift, and even the mighty shogunate will eventually crumble. Cherry blossoms, so beloved in Japanese culture, are a potent symbol of this mono, know aware the gentle sadness for the transience of things. They bloom with breathtaking beauty, but only for a short time before scattering in the wind. Your own stay here, however long it has felt, is also transient. You stand at the edge of the village or perhaps looking out over the sprawling city from a hill, the wind carrying the myriad sounds and smells of this feudal life. You've seen its harshness, its beauty, its strangeness. You've survived somehow, but the feudal era itself is beginning to fade to transition, and perhaps as the fabric of this reality wears thin, as the first whispers of a new age begin to rustle through the land, a way home might present itself. Or maybe that's just the wishful thinking of a very tired, very out-of-place traveler, yearning for a soft bed and a world where a misplaced bow isn't a capital offense. The thought of your own time with all its own problems suddenly seems like an unimaginable paradise. Word count 1091. As the mists of this feudal dream begin to thin as the sharp edges of its harsh realities soften, you feel a gentle pull. A fading of the sounds, the smells, the ever-present anxieties of this ancient, unforgiving world. The weight of the centuries, the crushing burden of survival that pressed so heavily upon your shoulders, begins to lift slowly, almost imperceptibly. The faces of the peasants, the stern gaze of the samurai, the bewildering alleys of the city, all start to recede like figures in a well-loved but aging tapestry. Their vibrant colors gently muted by the passage of time, or perhaps by the return to your own. The understanding dawns soft as the first light of your own familiar morning, that this journey, as harrowing and uncomfortable as it often was, is drawing to its close. You carry with you now not the mud of the paddy fields, nor the fear of a misplaced word, but a quieter, deeper appreciation for the immense tapestry of human experience, for the resilience of those who lived in times so very different from your own, and perhaps a renewed gratitude for the simple comforts and freedoms you so often take for granted. The hard ground beneath you seems to soften the coarse mat, giving way to something more yielding, more welcoming. The chill in the air warms the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, replaced by the faint, reassuring aroma of your own sleeping space. The urgent anxieties of feudal Japan recede, replaced by the quiet stillness of your own room. Let the echoes of that other time fade now like the last notes of a distant temple bell, becoming just a story, a gentle murmur in the quiet spaces of your mind. You are safe now, back in your own bed in your own time. The journey is over. Relax, release any lingering tension, and let the quiet comfort of your present moment envelop you.